First, I'm going to start by saying I'm not leaning on any cars today, much to the satisfaction of our fans. Every once in a while, we're really fortunate because we end up with some very unique, some very low mileage examples. And I'm standing next to a 604 mile 599 GTO, which is one of my personal favorite cars. But we're actually really lucky because standing next to this car is none other than the 2009 Geneva Auto Show 599 XX.
It's a follow-up to the FXX program.
Any magazine aficionados will recognize the number 3 and remember this car was released. And honestly, the car itself is so beautiful that when this car was shown in Geneva, I think the world kind of stopped and gasped a little bit and really marveled at the beauty of this race car. But it really gives us a unique opportunity as both of these cars are extremely low mileage. This car only has testing kilometers on it, so I think it comes out to about 400 miles. What's interesting, I think a lot of people don't know a lot about the XX program. They think it's like a spec race series, but truthfully it was developed around 2005 off the Enzo platform as a way to kind of co-opt driver and race development for certain model race cars. The FXX was first based on the Enzo, incredibly fast, and then they released the 599 off of their 599 V12 platform. The car itself is beautiful, but it's got a lot of really amazing technological advantages that allow this car to be extremely fast. I think one of the complaints that we've heard is that because of the front engine layout and the fact that the car is a little bit heavy, it's a little bit tough to point and shoot, but it didn't really seem to affect it on the Nürburgring because at the time when they ran it, it was under 7 minutes, which I believe was a record at the time for the car. This car is a pristine car. Later on in development, they did the Evo package cars, which had big wings, more active aero, dive planes, more horsepower. But to have the two cars next to each other, it's really a unique opportunity to kind of compare the two and look at some of the cycle development or what was really in the minds of Ferrari when the XX came out and then gave birth to the GTO. So if we walk around this car a little bit, there's some really interesting elements I'd like to point out. This car has something called active flow aerodynamics, and every aerodynamic piece on this car has a specific purpose, which allowed a car of this size and this weight to be pretty much nimble and handle really well. You have the side wings, and then a really interesting aspect of this car, because it's not a street car and it doesn't need brake lights and taillights, it has a rear vent diffuser in place of the taillights, which helps diffuse all of the airflow, and it also has a cooling element. If you look inside the car, it's typical race car, right? It's pretty barren, 2 seats, which would lend itself to more of a development race car than a purpose-built race car for the track. But these cars were really, really special. They only made 29 examples. I'm not sure how many of those became Evo, but when you see the really big rear wings and the more chunky aerodynamics, that tells you it's an Evo car. And if you look on the track, a lot of those guys that bought these cars opted for the $250,000 upgrade, made the car handle better, kind of helped solve some of those issues with the point and shoot that a lot of guys complained about. But nonetheless, what's happened now as the series begins to fade away a little bit, these have become incredibly sought after, and with only about 30 examples, investable. And I know I don't want to lean too much on investment. They're race cars, there's passion, there's purity to it. But I think with so little cars, we're starting to see a lot of collectors take these cars really seriously and add them to the collection, like this low mileage example. Having the opportunity now, moving over to the 599 GTO, this is something that's really cool to see side by side, because you could clearly see how the GTO borrows a lot, including aerodynamically, from the XX car. So, little history on the GTO, not that everybody needs the full history. There's only 2 other cars in Ferrari's history that carry that nameplate. The unmistakable 250 GTO, which was a homologation race car, ran at Le Mans. Basically anything that's real provenance race car these days, you want to have a Le Mans connection. And then the legendary 288 GTO, which was Group B homologation, which was developed for that, but it actually never went racing. So interestingly enough, Ferrari decided we're going to put the GTO badge on this car, even though it wasn't a homologation car, the 599 XX being a development race car. You didn't need to do a homologation example, but I think If you really look at the elements of the 599 GTO, it's certainly worthy of the badge. It is a lighter weight, aerodynamically progressive platform. It has, at the time, more horsepower and was faster than the benchmark Enzo. So for its time, it was really something that was groundbreaking and unique. What's also great about the 599 is that it was based off their road-going GT cars. So they had to balance a little bit. They couldn't make the car too extreme, but when you get in it, and I've driven this car, it feels really analog. Kind of let's think Carrera GT of the day, but Ferrari badged. There's driver aids, but nothing that really gets too involved. It's visceral, it's light. But more importantly, my honest opinion, I think it's beautiful. It's one of those timeless designs, whether you see the regular 599 GTV cars, the more aggressive GTO, and naturally the 599XX, it's just something that universally, I think Ferrari fans, car fans, anybody could agree, it's probably one of the more beautiful designs that Ferrari's ever had. If we open the door here, you'll notice it's still very businesslike, almost Spartan. In fact, many cars didn't even have radios, which would be located under that plate in the center, which really lends itself to the fact that, these were kind of these track-derived street cars built for weight saving. You get some comfort inside, but it's still, all business, all race, all Spartan. So that's really a good, interesting delineation between the GTO and the 599 street car. So what made the XX program so unique was it just feels like a spec race series program. You get full factory support from Ferrari. I mean, even if you look at, you've got all your spare boxes as you would with any other spec built race car. However, as I mentioned, these were kind of co-opted development programs. You would buy the car, you would keep it in XX program, and then they ran about 6 events a year. And in those 6 events that they ran, you would get full factory support, you would get driver coaches, you would get mechanics and technicians to come out, and then you would run your daily series and basically running against yourself. The 599, as I mentioned before, kind of a bigger car, configured front engine V12. So there was a little bit of a preference, I think, for the Enzo-based car from a pure driver standpoint. And then later on, we had the FXXK, which is based on the LaFerrari, which is a hybrid race car. Each car was faster than the last and the predecessor. So while this car was basically faster around the track than the Enzo-based FXX, when the K came out, that kind of became the go-to car. But interestingly enough, all cars, only about 29 to 35 for each model production run. You had to get invited into the program. So you had to be an established Ferrari client and willing to run the program. They weren't really big on, hey, you want to buy the car and put it in your collection. At that time, Ferrari frowned upon it. And I don't think many cars made it out that way. I think there were a few cars given to VIPs, but all the cars were intended for development for both driver and development for the race car. So let's open up some of these flight support cases, and pretty typical that you would find for organized track cars. You've got your quick release fuel filler bottle, other spares and tools, spare exhaust system, and some diagnostic equipment. As well as, if you notice, this is the car when it was released at the Geneva show car. So not only a really cool example, but in my opinion, one with some really interesting provenance. Box number 2 will have your spare wheels and tires, replacement front spoiler lip, your tools, some diagnostic stuff, and then there's extra storage. And in this case, we have the Classic K book. I think the other thing that's really amazing about these cars, and I think it's more speak to your soul spirit type thing, is, in my opinion, and I think general opinion, probably some of the best sounding Ferraris that they've ever made. The 599 GTO screams on the street, has a 9,000 RPM redline, and the XX having, I think, a 9,800 RPM redline with the V12 and the way they're configured. I honestly don't think there's a better sounding Ferrari than the 599 base car. I'm really happy and excited to be able to show you these cars. I mean, even for me, to get like 2 examples like this side by side next to each other for a deep dive and to be able to share it with you guys, it's kind of why we do this. I actually love both of these cars. So for me, to be able to enthusiastically walk around and explain them is also kind of an honor. So I hope you guys found it really interesting, and like and subscribe, and there'll be more content like this.